Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Touring with Travis. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. And we have Chris Webb, our Executive Director, behind the camera here once again. She got a little break yesterday afternoon when I was at the top of Old Baldy Lighthouse. She's climbed that thing plenty of times. She doesn't need to do it again. We're here at the location of the circa 1915 Coast Guard station that was established on Bald Head Island. Many of you, if you're familiar with Bald Head Island, may know of another boathouse. This boathouse that was out in the saltwater marsh, about a mile and a half behind me in this northern direction. That we lost that boathouse in the fall of 2018 to Hurricane Florence. Well, that was a service boathouse, meaning that is where the Coast Guardsmen and employees of the United States Lighthouse Service tied up their boats securely in those boats from Bald Head Island to be resupplied or to access Southport over on the mainland. So that was an area where they just tied up their service or their tender or their supply boats. This boathouse behind me was on the location of the Coast Guard station, meaning that they didn't tie up boats here to be used for supply runs. The boats that were stored in this building were the rescue boats, the surf boats that these surfmen and Coast Guardsmen were employing to rescue stranded mariners offshore. Well, when this was built in 1915, well, actually, before I start that, I want to let you know, if you're listening out there, give us a shout out in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from. Let us know what your connection to Bald Head Island is. And if you have any questions, write them down in those comments. We'll find an answer for you. Give us a shout out or words of encouragement. Let us know how your family's doing. We're hoping that they're safe and that they're healthy wherever you're tuning in from. And I'm going to follow along here on my phone so we can acknowledge your comments and have warm wishes towards you all. So the year 1915 is when Congress consolidated the United States Life-Saving Service and the United States Revenue Cutter Service. And together, those two branches of the federal government formed the United States Coast Guard as we know it today in 1915. So when the government opened up this station behind me, that is the first year of the United States Coast Guard's history. Now, unfortunately, several of the buildings on this compound have been lost to history. The current building that is with us today being the boathouse. That is where they stored their boats, and later on it served as a stable. We're going to dive into that history in a minute. So you might ask, what were the other buildings on this campus that have been lost to time or lost to history? Well, first of all, the dorm, the station, if you will, where these Coast Guardsmen are living, where they're sleeping, etc. And that was around here. This is the station. So down there somewhere would have been the dormitory, and that was what we call a Chatham-style dormitory station. A Chatham-style is named after Chatham up in Massachusetts. They first designed a station there, and they replicated that design from the Chatham, Massachusetts station in other stations all across America. So that is the design or the type station here. It's a two-story station, cedar shake siding, cedar shake roof, and on top was a small lookout tower built under the roof of that dormitory. So that's where the men slept. Another feature of this station was there was a wooden cistern behind the station. There was a cookhouse, a kitchen, a detached kitchen. We had the boathouse here where the equipment was stored. And then slowly but surely in the 1920s and 1930s, there were other cottages built in this location to my right that served as dwellings or cottages for the families that were living here. The Coast Guardsmen often brought their families over. They all lived collectively in this small community. If you joined us last week, we discussed Margaret Swan Hood, the eldest daughter of Captain Charles Norton Swan, the the lighthouse keeper of Cape Fear Light Station from 1903 to 1933. His eldest daughter ended up marrying Merle Hood, who was stationed here at the Cape Fear Coast Guard Station. They got to know one another because the lighthouse servicemen and the Coast Guardsmen, they were all one big collective community that relied upon one another for support, for camaraderie, for fellowship, all the works. So those two, Merle Hood and Margaret Hood, they lived in one of those cottages, and she writes about it or tells us about it in her oral histories that were recorded in the late 1980s by Polly Fish. And we have lots of photographic evidence I'm going to pull out of those 3, 4, 5 cottages that were here to my right that supplemented the living space or the living quarters for these Coast Guardsmen. But I'll follow along here and see what's going on Facebook. As you know, Bald Head Island don't get very much cell phone service. There's certainly not any Wi-Fi out here, so my phone is being a little difficult. Chris, do you have anybody shouting out to us?
I have Karen Mortimer. She's sitting on South Beach.
Hey, Karen.
Beautiful day.
Karen, a little birdie told me that you were very generous to the Old Baldy Foundation a few days ago, so I want to thank you for your support and your generosity during these trying times. We really appreciate all your kind words and your kind gestures towards our foundation and towards our mission. So thank you, Karen, and thank you, other folks. I know that there have been quite a few listeners here on these Facebook programs that have shown their support through donations and by making purchases on that brand new online store that you can access via oldbaldy.org. So thank you, everybody out there, for your support. So back to the Coast Guard station here. So we had all those dwellings. We had the boathouse, we had the cistern, we had these other cottages, a detached kitchen, and this Chatham-style station or dormitory. You might have, what happened to all of them? Well, we know for a fact that the cottages were torn down in later generations and that wood repurposed for other uses. The boathouse obviously survived here. The cistern, the kitchen, we're not sure what happened to those features, but what we do know is the 1915 Chatham-style station, the dormitory, if you will. In the year 1968, there was a couple here that were stranded on Bald Head Island for upwards of 4 days. They were on a sailboat, they were on their honeymoon, they got around Cape Hatteras, they got around Cape Lookout, and when they made it to Cape Fear, a storm blew them to safety here on the island. They found refuge or cover in that abandoned Coast Guard station. They lit a small fire, and next thing you know, the whole structure's on fire. That was in the year 1968, and that is how we lost that very important part of Bald Head Island's history. So this station was decommissioned in 1937. So it was in operation from 1915 to 1937. And it sat vacant for several years until World War II began in late 1941, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and we declared war on Japan and Germany and Italy and all those Axis powers. Well, 2 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Adolf Hitler allowed or expanded the mission of German U-boats to cross the Atlantic to hang off North Carolina's coastline and her fellow sister states up and down the eastern seaboard and the Gulf of Mexico. And those German U-boat submarines sought to torpedo Allied cargo ships and oil tankers, to destroy those Allied ships that were supplying England. Nearly all of England's oil, its gasoline, many of its foodstuffs, nearly all its war materials were being shipped from the formerly neutral United States into the war zone around Britain. And once the United States declared war against Germany, Hitler sought to terminate, to disrupt that trade in order to starve Great Britain into submission, just as the United States or the North of the Union were trying to blockade and starve the Confederates Confederacy or South during the American Civil War quite a few years earlier. So in the first few months of 1942, there were 60, some accounts say 72 ships that were torpedoed by German U-boats off the coast of North Carolina in those first 6 months of 1942. Well over a thousand sailors and merchantmen and merchant marinemen were killed, perished in North Carolina's waters because of these German U-boats attacking the shipping. And it hit close to home in March of 1942. Two ships, one called the John D. Gill and one called the SOS Nashville, were torpedoed and sunk just offshore of Cape Fear. The John D. Gill was an oil tanker. The SOS Nashville was an oil tanker as well. There were very few survivors. So in order to kind of mitigate these disasters, the United States government recommissioned or reestablished the Coast Guard station behind me, and they operated mounted horse patrols with the Coast Guardsmen that were stationed on Bald Head Island and other barrier islands up and down the eastern seaboard and the Gulf of Mexico. So basically they gave these Coast Guardsmen a horse and a dog. The dog, horse, and Coastie went up and down the beach of Bald Head Island all day and all night, and they're searching for German U-boats offshore. And when they see a German U-boat offshore, they're going to race that horse back to Old Baldy Lighthouse, about probably almost 2 miles away in a northwestern direction from this location. Old Baldy was decommissioned in 1935, so she was no longer a lighthouse, but the government had repurposed Old Baldy into a radio beacon. And that Coast Guardsman would notify that radio beacon. The radio beacon would transmit a signal up to Wilmington, where they would bring down a bomb or some sort of airplane to bomb those German U-boats that were sighted offshore of Bald Head Island, offshore North Carolina, and in barrier islands all across America's eastern seaboard and Gulf of Mexico. Let's check out and see what's happening here on Facebook. It is not cooperating with me.
Oh, well, Patty Henson, she said, my dad was there during those days, Coast Guard, Navy. He was on horse patrol.
Patty, I know I didn't want to bring, we take really good care of our collections, so I promise, Patty, I'm going to be bringing out some of the photographs that feature your father, or your father and some other comrades of his. I'm very inclined not to bring it out in these terrible conditions here on a barrier island. So during a 10 a.m. broadcast, we'll pull it out. But I am going to show you all some pictures here in David Stick's book of those Coast Guardsmen, those mounted horse patrol. So Patty, thank you for listening, and we love the pictures of your father in our collections.
We have a lot of other listeners that haven't commented or let us know where they're watching from, or just say hello.
Yeah, hey Daniel, hey Mackie, thank you for joining us. Yeah, give us a shout out, folks. Let us know where you're listening from. Let us know how your family or how are you doing. We're hoping you're all healthy out there. So these mounted horse patrols, they operated here on Bald Head Island. They're communicated via radio beacon up to Wilmington in case there's a sighting. We had two ships that were lost in March of 1942 off of Bald Head Island. There were no U-boats that were bombed offshore of Bald Head Island, very close to us. The closest U-boat that was successfully bombed by American forces is just offshore of Morehead City. So it'd be almost in a northeastern direction of Bald Head Island. There were roughly a half dozen U-boats that were successfully bombed offside, and other divers have identified and have explored. Some we don't know where they are, but plenty offshore of North Carolina. Now, as I was saying, unfortunately, after World War II, actually, I wanted to point out another really interesting feature on this station is during World War II, during these mounted horse patrols, they erected a large steel lookout tower right behind Chris here towards South Beach. This is a huge fire tower. If you're familiar with southeastern North Carolina, to me, they remind me a lot of the fire towers that you see at Holly Ridge, the Holly Shelter up in like Pender County. These fire towers that look up, they're like kind of steel, zigzag, very primitive. I'm going to show you a picture in a minute, but if you're familiar with those Pender County fire towers, that's exactly what it looked like in this location here on Bald Head Island. And that was used to supplement these horse patrols and searching the waters off of Bald Head Island for these German U-boat submarines. Now, what were they trying to protect here? Why was Bald Head Island, why was the Cape Fear River so important to the Allied war powers during World War II? Well, up in Wilmington, 30 miles upstream, was a major shipbuilding center. The North Carolina Shipbuilding Company, or corporation, produced 242 Liberty ships for the Allied war powers during World War II. These Liberty ships are big cargo ships that are being used to ship supplies, war materials in between the United States and all our manufacturing and infrastructure here over to Great Britain on the front lines in World War II. So that shipbuilding company was extremely important, a valuable piece of infrastructure during World War II. Also, there are prisoner of war camps. There's several prisoner of war camps that are established up in Wilmington during World War II. Many of these soldiers were prisoners of war captured during the North Africa campaign in around 1942 into 1943. So some significant features related to World War II up in Wilmington that had to be protected against these Germans and the German U-boats. So that brings me to my last point here. If you're familiar, hey Ann, it's good to see you. Thank you for watching from Charlotte, North Carolina. McCallie and Tony, thank you for tuning in and watching. Marissa, hey Marissa, I hope everything's going well over at the Conservancy. It's great to see from you. Daniel from my basement in Forest Hills, Wilmington, North Carolina.
I want to know what he's doing in his basement.
Yeah, maybe that's where his man cave is. Daniel, Forest Hills, that's not too far from around Ann and 8th, Ann and 10th Street. That is where one of the prisoner of war camps was. A very, very large prisoner of war camp was located not far from Forest Hills there. So thanks for listening, everybody. So it brings me to my last point. There are lots of rumors that have been perpetuated throughout history. You still run into folks that swear by it. Margaret Hood, in her oral history, again, Margaret Hood, the eldest daughter of Captain Charlie, lighthouse keeper here on Bald Head Island, swore in her oral history that she would wake up and see dozens of U-boats offshore. U-boats, they'd have to come up to the surface to recharge, They couldn't stay submerged on great lengths of time.
Okay, Tony says you used to live in his basement.
Yeah, I did. That beautiful antebellum mansion, the Costin House, was a beautiful English half basement. It was great. That's funny. My nickname downtown sometimes is Cellar Dweller. So I can't believe I just admitted that, Tony. So Margaret Hood, she swears that she saw German U-boats off of Bald Head Island growing up here. There's also a rumor that there was a chemical company in Curie Beach that was bombed, that was attacked by a German U-boat during World War II. Two rumors. Third rumor is every now and then you hear that there were Germans that successfully landed in New York City and were captured and charged for espionage. That's not a rumor. But the rumor every now and then you hear around these parts is that they had ticket stubs. They had movie ticket stubs in their pocket when they were captured from the movie theater in downtown Southport. none of these rumors can be substantiated. Unfortunately, they're probably just legend, tall tales. Nobody seems to recollect through first person that the chemical plant in Curie Beach was actually attacked. There's a question on what kind of guns would have been fired from this German U-boat to attack that chemical plant. They didn't necessarily have that armament, that type of machinery to attack that chemical plant. Additionally, the day that that chemical plant was supposed to be attacked, there were no German U-boats anywhere near southeastern North Carolina. These German U-boats, they kept very detailed logs, and those logs were recorded back to the Nazi war powers in Europe, and it just doesn't add up. Additionally, Margaret Hood, if she swears that she saw dozens daily offshore, those logbooks, they would tell us that there were these many U-boats offshore of Bald Head Island. And as for the movie ticket stubs, I think it's just kind of, an old tale that is just lingering on. So unfortunately, we can't tell you that anything was attacked in southeastern North Carolina. We cannot tell you that any U-boats were successfully destroyed by bombers offshore Bald Head Island. But we do know that there are dozens of men operating out of this Coast Guard station to make sure that that did not happen. So after World War II, this station is decommissioned once again. All operations move over to Oak Island, where the Coast Guard station is today. The station sits vacant, the cottages are repurposed, their wood is used for other projects. In 1968, the dormitory, the station, is burned down by these marooned honeymooners. And then finally in the mid-1970s, one of 19 families that composed the Generator Society, the first vacationers or community members on what we know as Bald Head Island today, repurposed this abandoned boathouse from the Coast Guard station and adaptively reuse it into one of the original 17 modern homes on Bald Head Island. And that is what you see there today. The left portion of the rectangle there, the cedar shake, being the original, and there to your right, that sun porch is an addition from the Generator Society era, not native, not original to the structure. There's a legend that the oars above the door may have been used. I've not been able to substantiate that claim, but it's a nice touch. Certainly the doors and the other elements of the house there are in fact original. A great couple takes care of this house. They're very passionate about the history of the home they have. They're very proud. They share it with anybody that comes by. They have pictures and photographs and blueprints in there hanging on the walls. They're the best people that we can have own this structure because they're very proud of the history of this location. So I'm going to check in here. No other comments, quite a few listeners. So thank you all for listening, for tuning in this afternoon to learn a little bit about the boathouse that has survived and the Coast Guard history here on Bald Head Island, especially that history during World War II. I like to call the last war to visit Bald Head Island shores. Long military history here on Bald Head Island. So go check out our new website, oldbaldy.org. There you'll find information about our virtual historic happy hour on April 8th. We're going to be discussing the history and the memory of the other boathouse. The boathouse that's arguably a little more famous, a little more well-known, that unfortunately we lost due to the effects of Hurricane Florence in the autumn of 2018. That happy hour is going to be held virtually through GoToMeeting. You can find information on our website on how to purchase tickets and how to get the technology to join us virtually for that historic happy hour. Also on our website, you'll find our brand new online store, all kinds of great apparel, books, puzzles, name it, it's on there. You're supporting a great cause by shopping on that store. So check out that website. There's all kinds of information on there. And like I said, it's brand new. It's very pleasing to the eye. Lots of great information. So navigate and check it out if you haven't been on our website in a while. You can see all these virtual programs that we've been doing for the past few weeks on our Facebook page, on our Instagram TV, or on our YouTube channel. You can visit our YouTube channel, and while you do that, hit subscribe. Help us increase our social media presence. So on behalf of the Old Baldy Foundation, we're hoping that you and your family are safe, that you're healthy. Thank you for all those essential business employees, all the grocery store workers and truck drivers and medical workers and doctors and nurses, everybody that's doing their job while we all stay behind and self-isolate so we can stem this pandemic and get life to back as normal as we know it. So thank you for listening, and we'll hope to see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. for another edition of Quarantine Collections.